Welcome to What's Up in the Watershed, a question and answer webinar brought to you by the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. I'm Kalita Scott. I'm one of 3 community engagement coordinators. I'm coming to you live from our main office in Sebastian, Florida. And today I'm so excited to invite my friend now, Jenny Tomes, who is the Port St. Lucie Utility Systems Assistant Manager of Community Outreach. That's quite a title. And today we're going to be discussing one of the projects that the NEP funded for the city of Port St. Lucie, the Elkam Septic to Sewer project. But she's also going to touch on other projects in Port St. Lucie, as well as the benefits of upgrading our septic systems and resident options moving forward in the future. So without further ado, I want to thank you, Jenny, for joining us. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I can go ahead and share my screen now.
Okay.
We'll get started. All right. Here we go. So in order to kind of understand where we are now, I sort of have to go back a little bit. So I'm going to do some storytelling. So I'm going to use the SPAR method. So SPAR is an acronym for setup, problem, action, and then result. So we are going to get right into the setup. So I have to give you a quick history of the city of Port St. Lucie. So General Development Corporation, or GDC, built Port St. Lucie in the late 1950s. They circulated ads all around the country, boasting, quarter acre lots for $10 down, $10 a month, get your slice of tropical paradise and beautiful exotic Port St. Lucie. If anybody was around then, you know that there wasn't much here. So that paradise is funny sounding, because it was pretty barren. But anyway, so GDC developed, like I said, developed the city. And again, it's like that old, movie quote, like, if you build it, they will come. So naturally, people were very interested in Port St. Lucie. People wanted to, build homes in Port St. Lucie. So GDC started GDU, which is General Development Utilities. So they were the ones who put in all the infrastructure for the water and sewer lines to service these new GDC homes. So here you see that, in 1959, we've got our first water treatment plant. We've got another water treatment plant a year later. 10 years later, now we're building wastewater treatment plants. So over the next 10 years, we've added 3 wastewater treatment plants. And that picture there is a picture of the old Sandpiper Bay Hotel and Resort. So that was the first community that GDC developed. So by the early 1980s, they had about 80,000 homes platted. And, other contractors were seeing the success of GDC. They were seeing people, wanting to move to Port St. Lucie. So other contractors started building homes, but GDC and GDU would not allow them to hook up to their water and sewer systems, their infrastructure. So all of those builders coming in were having to build homes, but they were having to utilize wells and septic systems. So you can probably see where I'm going here in my setup. So in 1990, GDC struggled. They couldn't meet demands. They sort of oversold. Again, they kind of did too good of a job, right? So everybody was wanting to move. The story hasn't changed, right? People still are wanting to move to beautiful Port St. Lucie, but GDCU filed for bankruptcy in 1990, and all of the utility assets, so all of the water and sewer lines, were transferred to St. Lucie County. Unfortunately, it only took about 2 years, but St. Lucie County struggled as well. They didn't really do much to expand the infrastructure. There were no further build outs. They kind of just, tried to hold the line. But, unfortunately, on a Monday morning, about 10,000 customers had no water. They didn't have much more than 10,000 customers at that time. But can you imagine waking up on a Monday morning, getting the kids ready for school, breakfast, getting ready for work, and you have no water? So that was an issue. So that made headlines that day. But what it did was it actually opened the dialogue between St. Lucie County and Port St. Lucie, who had been kind of sitting back, kind of wanting to take control of that infrastructure, but now was a good time to talk about, like, what are we going to do? But in 1994, all of those assets were transferred to the city of Port St. Lucie, who had already, sort of had an idea, like, we have got to expand the system. They have as many as 4 septic systems on 1 acre of property. And, if your septic system fails, we'll go into that here in a minute, but, Port St. Lucie, we're seeing some issues and seeing some problems with that. So again, we had in 1994, when City of Port St. Lucie took over the utility, we had just over 17,000 water customers and almost 1,100 sewer customers. There's such a gap there because, as many people were on city water, but they were still on septic systems. So not everybody was connected to city sewer. So just to review, you folks may already know, how a septic system works, but just to review, all of the wastewater that leaves your home. So everything that goes down the toilet, goes down the drain, the washing machine, the dishwasher, the kitchen sink, that all enters some type of a sewer system. So if you have a septic tank at your house, all of that wastewater leaves your home, it moves into that septic tank and it sort of pushes out what's already in there. So the solids sink to the bottom, and the grease and stuff from the kitchen sink, that's going to float on top of that septic tank. But again, all of the liquids kind of move in there and push out what's already in there, and they push it out into a drain field in your yard. A lot of these homes were both on well and septic. So if anything happens, if anything fails, any part of that septic system fails, there is the possibility that it could leach into not only the groundwater, but your well water. So that was definitely a concern for the city of Port St. Lucie. So that absolutely raises some public health concerns. Like I mentioned, there were as many as 4 septic systems on 1 acre of land. If any part of that septic system fails, it could possibly leach not just into groundwater, or if you're near a water body, it could leach into that water body, but can also get into your private well. Those wells are shallow. So it wouldn't take much for that polluted water to get in there. Obviously, if your well has been compromised and you're drinking it, you're consuming it, you're bathing in it, now you're at risk too. And then, back then, all the drainage, all the Port St. Lucie drainage was flowing into the North Fork. It still is flowing into the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. So not only are there public health concerns, but there's environmental concerns. There's also concerns about the economic health of Port St. Lucie. Businesses do not want to develop in the city of Port St. Lucie if they can't hook up to any kind of infrastructure, any kind of water or sewer lines. If you don't have businesses coming into your town, now your taxes are going to be higher. Your homes can only be so big because these private systems can only handle so much. And then also schools can't be built. So all of the students in Port St. Lucie were being bused to Fort Pierce schools because, again, your home size could only be so big. You can't build anything bigger. You can't build a school. All of that wastewater, there isn't a septic tank big enough that can handle all of that wastewater leaving school. So here comes the action part of the plan. All right, so we've talked about the setup, the problems, with sort of what we inherited from St. Lucie County and GDC. So now City Council at that time had to take some action. So they used a utility special assessment methodology. So basically, homeowners in Port St. Lucie are going to have to help pay for this new infrastructure. 40,000 notices were mailed out in 1994. So again, remember, Port St. Lucie took over in 1994. It didn't take long for them to start, kind of putting some plans into action. So as you can imagine, imagine now if you are a homeowner and suddenly you get assessed for all of this new infrastructure and, council says, well, you're going to have to help us pay these bills. You can imagine how many unhappy property owners there were within the city, but City Council held multiple meetings. They listened to all the concerns. There were so many folks, in fact, who showed up to one of the meetings that there's tales of a circus tent being put up outside City Hall because they couldn't have all those people in, but they set up monitors, they rolled out, carts with television screens on it so people could still be part of the meeting. They didn't want to turn anybody away. They wanted genuinely to hear all of the concerns. And the thing was, people were supportive of the plan. They wanted the new infrastructure. They saw the benefits of having all this new infrastructure, but they didn't want to bear that financial burden. Also, you've got septic system contractors who were not happy at all because, if people are moving from septic systems to city sewer, where's their business going to go? So there was a lot that they were dealing with. So city council had to look at, so we're going to expand the system. Okay, we're going to figure that out, but now we've got to figure out which system to go with. So I'm actually going to start on the gravity side of things. So, if you can picture, you're standing in the middle of the street, you've got homes on either side. So if you go with a gravity system, that sewage is going to leave your home, but it's going to need gravity to move it through. There's no pumps or anything to help it move through the system. So, the lines have to be at an angle. I'm doing it with my hands. I don't know if anybody can see me or not. I'm sort of like mimicking how gravity systems go, but the sewer lines leaving your home have to be on an angle, and it has to be deep enough, about 15 to 20 feet deep. So can you imagine taking an existing street and now you have to dig 15 to 20 feet deep to put in this whole sewer system? You are going to, upend not just the roads, but sidewalks, driveways, people's yards. It's tough for contractors to go down that deep. There's a ton of construction related to it, and there's a ton of restoration because now you've got to put, the lawns back in order, the driveways, back where they were, sidewalks, roads, and it's a lot more costly. So on the other side of things, we've got grinder systems. So if anybody lives in Port St. Lucie or has visited Port St. Lucie, so the grinder is what lies beneath that big green fiberglass lid that's typically on either the left or right side of people's homes, sort of in the front. But that system is more cost effective. You can see in the diagram, it's not nearly as deep as gravity. You only have to go about 3 to 5 feet deep. That tank can hold 50 gallons of wastewater, and it's easier for us to maintain, easier for us to make repairs. So if, with the grinder system, you don't call a plumber, you call City of Port St. Lucie Utility Systems, and one of our technicians comes out and services that. So it's part of the service. There's no additional cost if there is something happening with your grinder system there. But again, they decided to go with that option because at the time it just seemed less disruptive and then more cost effective. Folks are already upset about the financial burden. They didn't want to put the more costly burden of a gravity system on folks. But again, the grinder system, it does require power to operate. So again, all of the wastewater that leaves your home enters that 50-gallon tank. It works on a float system and a sensor system. So if the water in the tank reaches a certain point, then the pump will turn on and grind, hence the name. It'll grind up all the solids, sort of suck everything up, and then send it into the sewer system, which ultimately ends up at one of our wastewater treatment plants. All right, so now that we're experts on gravity and septic systems and grinder systems, so let's get back to City Council. So they implemented a multi-phased expansion program. So again, they were going to extend the water mains and the sewer mains throughout the entire city. And again, homeowners were assessed, but the assessment, you could actually, if you paid it all at once, you could get a discount. So they were trying to offer incentives too, just to make it a little easier. Or you could pay that assessment over 20 years through your property tax. And then homestead property owners, anybody who owned up to 3 lots consecutive right next to each other, they were exempt until they developed those. So, they didn't have to pay for 3 assessments all at once. So just sort of as they were developed. And then the connection fees, it wasn't mandatory. If your septic system was in good working order, it wasn't mandatory. You did not have to, and that is still the rule in the city of Port St. Lucie. Other neighboring cities have made it mandatory. A lot of residents have received letters. In Sewell's Point, Stewart, for instance, they received letters. You have 2 years to hook up. That's it. But it has never been made mandatory in the city of Port St. Lucie. But if your septic system fails and the infrastructure is in place and available, then you do have to hook up to city sewer. And that's not a Jenny rule, that's a Department of Health rule. We also offer a 10-year financing program with no interest, and I'll break down the cost of that here in a moment. But you know, if you have a private well, you can still use that for irrigation, no problem. But all new homes, all new construction, you have to hook up to city sewer. Oops. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead here. Okay. All right. So I mentioned here's that conversion fee. So if your septic system fails and you have to hook up to city sewer, or if you just want to hook up to city sewer, the conversion fee, again, it's a 10-year interest-free financing program. So you see that the total cost is $6,207, which breaks down to $50.98 per month for 10 years. And then there's a $45.50 recording fee there. So again, we try to make it as easy as possible. So there's a line item in there for $577 for septic abandonment. So your septic abandonment, there's a particular way you have to do it. It is left in the ground, but it has to be completely pumped out. But it is left in the ground and sort of collapsed. But again, it's a very particular way that it has to be done so as not to disrupt anything around it, or to pull it up out and, you know, cause any kind of issues. All right. All right, so if anybody wants more information about conversions from septic to sewer, and you live in the city of Port St. Lucie, you can go to cityofpsl.com/septic to sewer. So there's a lot of information on there. Warning signs too, to tell if your septic system may be on the cusp of failure. And then again, a breakdown of those costs, and then just sort of the process. But in 2018, a lot of folks were starting to connect. There were a lot of conversions, but the wait times were getting longer and longer. I mean, it was going from 4 to 6 weeks, anywhere to months, to 6 months. It was taking a very, very long time because there was such an extensive wait list. So City of Port St. Lucie hired a subcontractor to help bring those wait times down. So there was a ton of new construction happening. So, in order to keep up with all the new construction and all the existing residents wanting to connect, we were able to actually decrease the wait time by hiring a subcontractor. In 2023, they went another step further, kind of behind the scenes stuff, but anyway, they sort of created a new workflow. So it was much easier on our end, just to get through all of those folks wanting to connect. So again, in 2018, we had started working with Harbor Branch. So there were more and more health advisories. If anybody's, goes out and fishes or does any kind of boating or watercrafting or anything in the river, there were, it just seemed like there was an uptick in advisories from the health department. It was unsafe swimming conditions. We know there were a lot of algal blooms and things like that. So City of Port St. Lucie partnered with Harbor Branch and research professor, Dr. Brian LaPointe, to go out and test and kind of see if they could track, where this pollution was coming from. So in 2018, phase 1 began, but they were testing for fecal coliform, which is a very nice way of saying human waste. They were testing for sucralose, which is a sweetener found in foods, and then acetaminophen. Acetaminophen, I have trouble with that word. Anyway, an ingredient found in a lot of medicines. So these 3 things are absolutely from humans, which is an indication that there are some septic systems leaching because of failures into the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. So that's what they were looking for. But they went through phase 1, phase 2, but in phase 1, they were sampling a tributary, so like a stream or a small river that flows into a larger river. There were spots upstream and downstream in the North Fork, and then they tested in different canals that lead to the river. So Sagamore, Hogpen Slough, Elkam, Monterey. So phase 2, they did more groundwater sampling, and then they were looking for dissolved nutrients, which they found. So again, those dissolved nutrients from the coliform, sucralose, and that word I can't say that's in medicine. So again, they were able to track, and there's not one magic bullet. There's a lot of contributing factors that lead to the health or harm the river. But this was a big one. And again, you know, a lot of science pointed to septic systems. So grant funding was available. So they focused on cleaning up the hot spots and figuring out, all right, what can we do to try to make the river, you know, healthy again. So we got funding from the Indian River Lagoon Council, and they have graciously been giving us grant funding since 2019. And then the city of Port St. Lucie, beginning in 2020, always earmarks $100,000 for this grant funding. So the grant funding is basically for folks living in certain hotspots that I mentioned, those canals that were identified. Those folks are eligible for grant funding, which means that grant funding will pay for 50%. So that grant funding will split the cost of conversion in half. So in 2020, that was phase 1. So letters were sent to folks living in the Sagamore hotspot. So 17 folks completed applications. So we had about 26% participation. Phase 2, another batch of letters were sent out in Elkam, phase 1, 20 and 22. We had about 34% participation. And then in 2021, an additional 30% of folks that received those letters stating that they were eligible for grant funding participated. And then another round of letters in 2021, we had 25% participation. So it's, again, not everybody is taking advantage of it, but we're doing what we can to just continue to remind them that these funds are available. Certainly, we don't want these funds to go unused. In the Monterey area, we see that we had a little over 21% participation. So 33 grants were given out. And then again, you know, more letters were being sent out, but you know, sometimes you get that mail and you kind of just toss it. You think it's junk mail. You don't really realize what it is, but you know, we've done extensive outreach to let these folks know that this grant funding is available. And quite frankly, some folks haven't wanted to convert because, you know, as much as there's grant funding, you know, you still have to put up, you know, some of the money, and then you now have a new bill from month to month. So, you know, some people have not taken advantage of it, but these are fresh numbers as of July 15th. So there are still 13,257 septic systems within city limits of the city of Port St. Lucie. Almost 4,000 of those are within 50 feet of a waterway. So we're seeing that number slowly drop, which is really exciting. But just since 1999, when the conversion expansion program was put into place, we've had over 10,650 conversions. And then with all that new construction, you know, there's no new septic tanks, remember? So any new homes, new businesses, we've had over 32,557 new construction. And then that is a combined total of 43,000. So with the septic to sewer program, we've tracked how many gallons of wastewater have been kept from entering the ground. So 20 billion gallons of wastewater has been diverted, has been kept from entering the ground. That 20 billion gallons of wastewater has entered our sewer system and then gone on to one of our 2 wastewater treatment facilities where we're able to properly treat it. Currently, we have 78 conversions. So we have 78 residences waiting for their conversions to take place. So on average, we do about 412 conversions a year, but we're projecting way more in fiscal year 24-25. So about 550 are projected. All right. And that's it. I know that was a lot of information. I was trying to get through quickly, so we had some time if there were any questions.
Jenny,
Yes.
there are
Oh,
there's lots of questions,
okay. All
but
right.
I want to thank you so much for that
Of
great
course.
presentation. I want to
Good.
say that I got so much more than I was expecting. So thanks for the history.
Yeah.
Got a little methodology there.
Okay.
Um, you hit on the partnership aspect. I love it, and especially the opportunities for our residents. So I'm going to get right into the questions
Okay.
that I've got. So there was a question about the health benefits of moving from septic to sewer, from septic to a city sewer system. Did you touch on that, or would you like to elaborate on some of the health benefits? I know you mentioned public health in the past and what they did and how they
Yeah.
got to where we are, but are there any specific benefits that you highlight? Um,
It's mostly, keeping the issue is once a septic system fails, it's not like an alarm goes off.
mhm.
Many folks maintain it, they do like their 3 to 5 year check on it. I mean, a lot of folks with septic systems want to maintain them. They're not flushing a bunch of wipes and things that are going to be harmful. But unfortunately, just sometimes, there's a lifespan on
Yeah.
some of those systems. And if it fails, unfortunately, it sort of fails. And then you realized it failed. Um,
Well, that leads us into another question. How do you determine if its systems failed? And I know you mentioned your website.
yes,
The
there are
the
warning signs, and oops, sorry, I can,
I think those are important to the conversation that we just had. So
yeah,
definitely.
definitely. Let me search for that quickly. And that's at cityofpsl.com/septic to sewer, but I can read off some of those
I'll
quick.
get a next question ready for you.
Okay. Okay. So here we go. Signs, warning signs. Okay. We've got 5 signs. So gurgling noises, an awful smell, toilet and drain issues. You've got water backing up, or there's standing water on your property. So right where that drain field is located, you've got smelly, standing water. So those are some of the signs.
Okay. The next question that I have is how will the increased load on the city's wastewater treatment facilities be managed to prevent overflows or untreated discharges?
So we're ready. Okay, we are ready. So right now, both of our wastewater treatment plants combined can treat 18 million gallons of wastewater a day. We're not even close to capacity, not even close. So we've got lots of room for more. It's funny, the city of Port St. Lucie, especially in utility systems, was very forward thinking. They knew there was going to be growth. They looked 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, and we have 50-year plans in
Yes.
place.
Mhm.
So they knew that there was going to be a lot of growth. So they prepared for it early, which is good. So capacity wise, it's not going to be a problem.
That is great. One more question, maybe not one more, we have time for a few more, but for those, you talked about hotspots. And so for those who don't live in an identified hotspot, might there be any grants available to them? Especially not everyone in the hotspot has been taking advantage.
Of course,
How can we
not
get
at
the
this.
word out more? Mhm.
That's a great question. And unfortunately, not at this time. They focused on those hotspots. I have a map that I can pull up if anyone's interested in seeing, as I mentioned, let's see, Sagamore, Elkam, and Monterey. If you're not familiar with those canals, you may not know where they're located in the city, but I have a map that I can share or put in the chat, or if anybody's interested in that.
I think we've got a lot of interest. We've got one comment saying that this information is great. They didn't know about the history, so that definitely was some great information to share. Let me see, do we have time for another question? Okay, here's another one. Do you feel that those who are still on septic are doing a good job using their systems more lightly and not using garbage disposals and et cetera?
I've talked to a lot of folks out in the community, and it's funny. It almost seems like they're the ones really taking good care of their septic systems. It's the other folks who are abusing them. If you have guests coming into town and they
Yes.
don't know, they don't realize the delicate, balance of the septic system. I hear a lot of that. Oh, I had guests come in and they flushed wipes and they put all this grease down the sink. It's like, so, but I think people want to prolong the life of their septic system, and they do maintain. I find that majority of people take care of it, but you have a lot of new folks who've never lived in Florida before who are moving to Port St. Lucie. They don't know what that big green lid is. They have no idea. So those are the folks we're actually trying to reach more so to tell them not to, flush wipes and different things.
Well, we just got this last question and we'll wrap it up after this, but we've got a question that says, will there be a form of enforcement to make people convert to septic? I think that's a good question.
Not that I'm aware of. That is up to the city council. And, all this time, all these years, that's never, ever, ever been enforced. Unless there's some sort of state mandate in the future, but I don't foresee this particular council making that mandatory. Like I said, many of our neighbors are in Martin County. It's mandatory. I think you get 2 years to convert, but I don't see that happening in Port St. Lucie.
Okay. Well, I think that we are right at our 30-minute mark. Jenny, thank you so much for giving us so much. Some really great information, and hopefully we can get more people watching and sharing this webinar. And I just want to thank you for your time and being a great partner.
Of course.
Thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
All right. And if there's any questions that you have, please remember to visit the cityofpsl.com/septic to sewer. All right, guys, I think that's it. Thanks for joining What's Up in the Watershed. We'll see you next time.